Good evening. It's Thursday, the 15th of May, and here's what's making news around the world on World News Tonight. Strategic pact. US and Qatar forged new security and trade ties in landmark Gulf agreement. Nation divide. Supporters praise an economic miracle as critics decry wage cuts and rising costs. New visitors. Lam Yuan and He Fang settles into Austria's Farm Conservation Center.
From Colombo, this is World News Tonight with Amarsha Fernando.
Good evening once again. President Trump signs a $1.2 trillion economic and defense deal with Qatar, including record-setting Boeing jet sales, economic projects and military contracts, aimed at deepening U.S. strategic influences across the Gulf region.
U.S. President Donald Trump, currently on a 4-day Gulf tour, signed a series of major security and economic agreements worth at least $1.2 trillion with Qatar on Wednesday. This came after Trump signed a similar multi-billion-dollar deal with Saudi Arabia the day before. According to the White House, the package aims to boost U.S. exports and attract foreign investment in exchange for enhanced security cooperation. The package includes a record-breaking deal for American aircraft maker Boeing to supply Qatar Airways.
From Boeing, that's the largest order of jets in the history of Boeing. That's pretty good. It's over $200 billion, but $160 in terms of the jets. That's fantastic. So that's a record, Kelly.
The White House said the plane contract between the two countries is expected to support some 154,000 American jobs annually. Additionally, U.S. energy engineering firm McDermott has entered into a partnership with Qatar Energy to develop critical energy infrastructure through 7 projects worth $8.5 billion. Defense deals were also part of the package. Raytheon secured a contract worth $1 billion to bolster Qatar's drone defense capabilities. And General Atomics signed an agreement worth $2 billion to supply the Gulf state with unmanned military aircraft. The White House added that both sides signed a letter of intent to strengthen security cooperation, including support for Qatar's air and maritime defense systems and burden sharing at the Al Udeid Air Base, which is the largest U.S. military base in the region. Trump is set to conclude his trip on Thursday with a final stop in the United Arab Emirates.
Efforts to broker a Ukraine ceasefire continues as President Zelensky welcomes European leaders, but Putin resists a 30-day truce proposal and instead calls for negotiations in Turkey, leaving a potential face-to-face still uncertain.
All eyes are on Russian President Vladimir Putin and whether he will show to peace talks in Turkey on Thursday, after his Ukrainian counterpart vowed to wait for him in person in the capital, Ankara.
If this is not just posturing in the media, and that Putin really wants to meet in real life, at the level of leaders, we'll do everything we can to agree to a ceasefire. But it is with him that I must agree on a ceasefire, because he is the only one who will actually decide.
President Zelensky and other international leaders see it as a litmus test on whether Putin is genuinely interested in putting an end to the war. If it is a bluff, the EU foreign policy chief is calling Putin on it.
They wanted also in the global south to make them believe the narrative that, Europeans or Ukrainians are these warmongers, they want war, but, Putin is a peaceful person, just attacking and killing some civilians. They really bought this narrative. But now everybody can see that this is not the case.
To further pressure Moscow, the heads of France, Poland, the UK and Germany are turning to their trusty playbook, offering more military support for Ukraine and threatening further sanctions, which according to the German Chancellor will be enacted if no progress is made by the end of the week.
We will advocate further sanctions in the event that the Russian leadership doesn't agree to the proposals that we made together last weekend.
The 30-day ceasefire proposal was issued by the EU leaders in Kyiv on Saturday and backed by the United States. On Tuesday, President Donald Trump said his Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, would be present in Turkey for the negotiations.
The US imposes new sanctions on Iran's ballistic missile program during President Trump's Gulf visits, citing Tehran's destabilizing behavior and urging the country to abandon nuclear ambitions and cease support for regional military proxies.
Following U.S. President Donald Trump's reinstatement of a maximum pressure policy on Iran and a series of recent nuclear talks between Washington and Tehran, the United States has issued new sanctions targeting Iran's ballistic missile program. On Wednesday, the U.S. Treasury Department unveiled fresh sanctions aimed at curbing Iran's efforts to domestically manufacture components for ballistic missiles. The announcement came during President Trump's visit to Saudi Arabia, where he emphasized the need for Iran to cease its nuclear ambitions and activities aimed at destabilizing the region. He stated that Iran must stop sponsoring terror and end its support for regional proxy groups. He also made an appeal to Iran to reach a nuclear deal amid ongoing indirect negotiations between the U.S. and Iran mediated by Oman. He expressed his hope to see Iran thrive and mentioned that he is counting on Qatar to help facilitate the process.
After deadly clashes in Syria, Israel's Druze community calls on the Israeli military to defend their ethnic kin across the border, stressing a moral obligation to intervene should violence against the group flare up again.
More than 100 Druze Syrians, mostly gunmen, were reportedly killed in deadly clashes with the country's Islamists in recent weeks. It sparked members of the Druze minority in Israel to push for the Israeli defense of their community across the border. The Druze are an Arab minority straddling Lebanon, Syria and Israel, whose secretive religion is an offshoot of Islam. Israel has a good relationship with its 120,000-odd Druze citizens whose men serve in the Israeli Defense Forces. It's one of the reasons for Israel's deepening involvement in Syria. Its military released video clips in early May said to show its forces treating Druze men injured from sectarian violence in southern Syria, as well as footage said to show airstrikes across the country. It warned Syria's new Islamist-led government on May 2nd that its attacks were in support of the country's Druze minority. Aside from Druze solidarity, Israel also sees the Islamists as a threat, and it's worried about their ally Turkey gaining a foothold near Israel's border. In a major policy change, US President Donald Trump announced on Tuesday he would lift long-standing sanctions on Syria, despite Israel's concerns. Syria has accused Israel of a dangerous escalation and rejected any foreign intervention. The government appears to be making concessions to ease tensions with the Druze. That includes appointing a Druze cabinet minister and hiring security forces locally rather than bringing them in from elsewhere.
Let's go for a short commercial break. More world news on the other side. And welcome back. Australian Prime Minister Anthony Albanese meets Indonesian President Prabowo Subianto in Jakarta during his first official state visit since Labour's re-election, aiming to strengthen economic ties and regional cooperation between the two Indo-Pacific partners.
Australia's Prime Minister Anthony Albanese held talks with Indonesian President Prabowo Subianto on defence cooperation and global trade today, describing Jakarta as an indispensable partner on his first international visit since his re-election. Albanese sworn into office on Tuesday after his centre-left Labour Party won an increased majority in Parliament, said his visit showed the priority Canberra placed on defence and economic ties with Jakarta. He urged Prabowo to forge closer defence ties with Australia after an agreement was struck last year covering maritime security, counter-terrorism and disaster response. Australia wants to increase economic ties with Southeast Asia as it seeks to diversify export markets to reduce reliance on China and in response to trade uncertainty caused by US President Donald Trump's tariffs. In their meeting, Prime Minister Anthony Albanese and President Prabowo Subianto reaffirmed their commitment to enhancing bilateral relations. Albanese expressed strong support for Indonesia's bid to join a key regional trade agreement, urging Australian businesses to engage more ambitiously with Indonesian emerging economy. The leaders also discussed expanding defense and security cooperation under the major security agreement signed last year. President Prabowo emphasized the enduring nature of Australia-Indonesia relationship, stating that the two nations are destined to be neighbors who help each other in difficult times. He expressed gratitude for Australia's view of Indonesia as a close friend, highlighting the importance of maintaining strong bilateral ties.
New data reveals HIV testing and monitoring in South Africa have declined significantly following US aid cuts, with pregnant women, infants and adolescents bearing the brunt of reduced access to life-saving health services.
The testing and monitoring of HIV patients in South Africa has significantly fallen, previously unpublished government data has shown. That since, and according to 4 HIV experts, appears to be because of a US cut in aid that funded health workers and clinics. South Africa has the world's highest burden of HIV. Around 8 million people, or 1 in 5 adults, live with the virus. The US was funding 17% of South Africa's HIV budget before President Donald Trump's cuts. That paid for resources like, for example, the salaries of 15,000 healthcare workers under the US President's Emergency Plan for AIDS Relief, or PEPFAR. Those healthcare workers carried out tests and counselling and followed up with patients. PEPFAR funding also supported NGO-run clinics, which have now closed. Having frozen many foreign aid programs, Trump has reinstated some life-saving assistance, including parts of PEPFAR. But he's also targeted South Africa specifically, cutting all funding to the country via an executive order in February. In the last 2 months, according to data from South Africa's National Health Laboratory Service, viral load testing has fallen. It measures how much of the virus is in the blood of people living with HIV who are on antiretroviral treatment. That checks if treatment is working and if the virus is sufficiently suppressed to prevent it from spreading to others.
Please finish the course.
The data showed viral load testing is down more than 21% for pregnant women, while early infant diagnostic testing has dropped almost 20%. Amid Trump's America First agenda, the long-term future of HIV-related US assistance in South Africa and indeed the rest of the world remains unclear. The US State Department did not immediately respond to a request for comment. A spokesperson for South Africa's Department of Health, given a summary of the testing data, said more analysis was needed. He added that South Africa already had challenges with patient retention and viral load testing before the aid cuts. However, HIV experts have been saying for months that the health ministry has been downplaying the impact of the funding loss. A drop in testing figures could be an early warning sign, they added, followed by a rise in new cases and deaths.
While Argentina's inflation cools under President Milei's reforms, many citizens struggle with pension cuts and low wages as strikes erupt nationwide, highlighting the human cost of what some call an economic miracle.
As Argentina's inflation cools, citizens remain divided on President Javier Milei's aggressive austerity measures. In April, monthly inflation slowed 2.8%, beating analysts' expectations of 3.1%. Milei inherited a troubled economy, triple-digit inflation, dwindling foreign reserves and strict capital controls. Since taking office, his sweeping reforms have stabilized financial indicators and earned praise from international markets. Some supporters and global media outlets have even dubbed the turnaround an economic miracle, but the cost of that stabilization has been high. Cuts to government spending have slashed pensions, stalled infrastructure projects, and eroded wages for public sector workers, including teachers. Milei has prioritized growing the private sector, but many say it's coming at the expense of the vulnerable. The impact of Milei's policy mix is visible across sectors. While restaurant and hotel costs led price increases, home maintenance and equipment saw the smallest rises. Food and non-alcoholic beverages climbed 2.9%, just above the national average, while rent and utilities increased by 1.9%. Despite signs of economic stabilization, the cuts have sparked widespread strikes and protests across the country. Last month, Milei's government scrapped currency controls that had restricted foreign currency purchases, replacing them with a floating exchange rate and between 1,000 and 1,400 pesos per dollar, a move intended to further liberalize the economy.
The US Defense Intelligence Agency projects North Korea could possess 50 intercontinental ballistic missiles by 2035, up from fewer than 10, posing a growing long-range nuclear threat amidst continuing tensions with Washington and regional powers.
North Korea is projected to have 50 intercontinental ballistic missiles capable of carrying nuclear warheads by the year 2035. According to the latest report by the U.S. Defense Intelligence Agency, Pyongyang has successfully tested ballistic missiles with sufficient range to reach the entire U.S. territory. For now, North Korea is assumed to have fewer than 10 ICBMs, but the agency expects the regime to produce around 40 more over the next 10 years.
Let's take a short commercial break. More world news on the other side. And welcome back. Dressed in suits and riding vintage motorcycles, thousands of bikers in Buenos Aires took to the streets for the Distinguished Gentleman's Rise, raising awareness of prostate cancer and men's mental health challenges worldwide.
Thousands of motorcyclists rode through the streets of Buenos Aires on Sunday, May 11, wearing suits, ties and polished shoes, not just for style but for a cause. The event, known as the Distinguished Gentleman's Ride, aims to raise awareness about prostate cancer and men's mental health, with a strong focus on suicide prevention. The ride, which began in Sydney in 2012, has since grown into a global movement taking place in cities around the world each year. Riders participate by dressing in elegant clothing while riding classic or vintage-style motorcycles, creating a striking visual that sparks curiosity and conversation.
Austria's Vienna Zoo unveils its new panda pair, Lan Yuan and He Fang, as part of a decade-long conservation partnership with China, delighting visitors and renewing diplomatic ties through endangered species preservation efforts.
In Austria, two new giant pandas from China, female Lan Yuan and male He Fang, found new homes in Vienna's Schönbrunn Zoo on Wednesday. The 5-year-old panda's arrival follows the return of the zoo's previous panda pair to China in late 2024 and is part of a new round of a 10-year conservation cooperation between Austria and China, which began in 2003. The China Wildlife Conservation Association and Schönbrunn Zoo have prepared and made every effort to ensure the safe and smooth arrival of the young pandas to the zoo after they underwent a quarantine period since their initial arrival in Vienna in April. The pandas can now be seen by the public in their newly renovated enclosure at the zoo.
And with that, we wrap up today's edition of World News Tonight. Up next, Prasansa Gunawardana is standing by for the nightly business report. With hopes of seeing you again, I'm Amasha Fernando, and we leave you tonight with the visuals from Dolce & Gabbana's Fashion Fantasy Lands in Rome with an immersive exhibition. Thank you for watching and have a great night.